Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick. We're here to continue our series of expectations. And these are shows where we take two players from the Ravens, one offense and one defense, talk to one of the local analysts about that. And I had a lot of fun doing these over the years. This is the second year doing them and gives us a cross-sectional view at some position groups. At least that's the hope. To talk to me today is Dan Ibrahimi. Dan, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Ken. Thank you for having me on again.
Great to always enjoy talking football with you. Today we're going to talk about Tyler Huntley and Brandon Stephens, an offensive defensive player. Obviously some guys who not everything ended exactly the way they would like in 2022. Huntley with a big fumble, and Brandon Stephens ended up the year injured, didn't even get to play in either of the Cincinnati games.
Yeah, no, it was it was a kind of a whirlwind for both. I mean, with Brandon Stephens, I don't know, did we ever find out what that mystery illness he got in Cincinnati was? Because that was really disappointing, and it kind of felt like with the Atlanta and Pittsburgh games the 2 weeks before that, it was going to be really interesting to see how he played in that season finale.
Yeah, I never heard more about it, and it may have come out in a press conference, or people honestly may have lost interest in the topic. When you have a big fumble like that, and you're part of the media, you don't want to ask your one question about what was the injury or what was the illness with Brandon Stephens. Anyway, obviously missed those games. That was a little disappointing. Let's go ahead and talk about Tyler Huntley first, if you're okay with that.
Sure thing.
So he took the place of Lamar Jackson to close out the season. It's actually the third straight year this has happened. In 20, of course, he took over in the playoff game after Lamar took a big hit, and then took over in each of the last two seasons for multiple games. 21 season, the Ravens, despite playing with a lot of disadvantages after, frankly, being a miracle team for a little over half a season, about 11 games, they were in position to be the number one seed in the whole AFC. And then Tyler Huntley took over, and they played very close games, but they could not win games. And they ended up not making the playoffs in 21, right? That's correct. Yeah, not making the playoffs in 21.
Yep.
21 and 22, Tyler Huntley, some differences. I want to talk a little bit about that. And one of the things we kind of talked about in the production meeting is that we don't want to be super negative about these players, but Tyler Huntley, there's actually, we have to talk about some weaknesses, and it's going to seem like it's piling on a little bit, but he's still working with a 76.6 passer rating career. It's not really improving. It was 77.2 in 2022. And by today's standards, that's utterly terrible. That actually is very close to what Johnny Unitas's career passer rating was.
Oh, that's funny. That's really interesting how that's really just the game has progressed, I guess.
Yeah. 5.24 yards per attempt in 2022, which is awful. And unfortunately, that was a career high. 4.89 is his career number. So we used to get on Joe Flacco for being in the fives, but it's bad. In 2021, they were really trying to scheme the ball out of his hands a lot. In 2022, he actually did, I think, a better job, certainly in the playoff game, in terms of leading the team effectively. And he had 2.98 seconds of time per throw, which is pretty darn close to what Lamar had done. I think the fear was maybe even more in 21 that the offensive line wasn't there, and they really had to get rid of the ball quickly. And that was hampering everybody's statistics. Brown became a 5-yard per target receiver, and no one was getting deep opportunities with that version of Huntley. And people want to blame that on Greg Roman. The first guy to blame it on is probably Alejandro Villanueva, because him playing left tackle was really a horrendous situation for the Ravens.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, that signing, looking back on it, really couldn't have gone a whole lot worse. I mean, it's easy to kind of look back in hindsight and wonder what that Villanueva money could have been spent on. But no, I totally agree with your assessment of Huntley. That Bengals game was actually the most passing yards per attempt and air yards per attempt of Huntley's career in any game where he threw more than one pass.
That's
Um,
good.
yeah, and I mean he finished with 226 yards. So, looking back at his performance last year, I think it's just it's really interesting kind of to see it's almost like when you look at when he's played, if you just separated the seasons out and didn't tell people which one came first, in what order, I don't think it would be that easy to tell, frankly. I think that last year, obviously when Huntley came into the league, I was honestly shocked at how fast he was. And last year, I mean, the Ravens really weren't letting him show off that part of his skill set. And I think that that was probably because it seemed at that point at least that Lamar was going to be out for an extended period of time, and really Huntley getting hurt would have just probably taken away whatever hope they had.
That's a really good point, by the way, is they needed to try and keep Huntley healthy, even though he certainly struggled during the regular season in particular. He's a fast player. He's a very much a straight line, no juke runner, and it's you get so used to watching Lamar making people miss, and then you see Tyler Huntley, and he's just trying to take the path of least resistance. Typically, he had one run that I recall, and I'm trying to remember the game, but just ran right into a defender. It's like there wasn't even a opportunity to avoid him. And Lamar in those situations, at the very least, he will usually try and make some people miss and usually be successful at it, but particularly in the open field. But if he's also running right at me, he knows exactly how to take a tackle. And, obviously Huntley got beat up a little bit this last year, worse than he has in either 20 or 21 in limited playing time.
Yeah, no, he absolutely has. I think I know the play you're talking about. I can't quite place it either. I mean, he did leave the Pittsburgh game, that the Ravens, or actually, yes, he left the one that the Ravens won 16-14 and they won that, and Anthony Brown, I believe, came in for the end of that one. So it may have been in that game, but yeah, no, he's definitely quick, like you're saying. He's just not really all that shifty, and I think that's definitely held him back. He did manage 54 rushing yards on 9 attempts against the Bengals. I think that with Huntley, I mean he has a cannon to an extent for an arm. I mean, he can really air that thing out. I think it's more an issue of those medium depth throws. Certainly some of the onus could be placed on the Ravens' lack of offensive playmakers last year, but I think that's where he's really struggled. Ken, I think I've heard this on your podcast before, but excuse me if I'm misspeaking, but it's progressing through the reads with him that has been a big issue. If he's not going to that first guy, it's sort of anybody's guess as to what's going to happen when he does have to move on from that first read.
Yeah, I agree completely. And the Ravens did a pretty good job of managing him just out of passing plays. And if you look at the game where the Ravens, I believe they effectively clinched their playoff spot, if they didn't actually clinch their playoff spot on Christmas Eve against the Falcons. So Huntley was the quarterback for the entire game, only threw 17 passes the whole game, 9 completes. He did have a touchdown in their 94 rating for the game for what that means if you're only throwing 17 passes. But they also ran the ball 34 times. And, the offense just out of necessity really had to change to fit the quarterback when he's been in there. And Lamar, you'd have the option to do either. Maybe you wouldn't want to take chances. But Huntley did a very good job in that game of game management, of getting enough done to win the game, of realizing when he didn't have to do more to win the game. They had an 8-point lead late. That was with 2:03 to go. So I think there's only an onside kick in that game that they attempted, or maybe they didn't even. I'm trying to put the pieces together in my head now, but it was a it was a well managed game, and that was good. They won the game against Pittsburgh as well. So it's not like he didn't have his moments that helped the Ravens make it to the playoffs. And then it's just the Ravens seemed so outclassed by Cincinnati. Then they went in there in week 18, and Huntley wasn't even available for that game, right? That was Anthony Brown was at quarterback, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. And then the next week they came back and Huntley was back, and it's honestly like he was a different player. And you mentioned that the rushing yards himself, the rushing yards for the team were good. I think he had 155, good amount of passing yards. He was really moving that offense. And then this Charlie Brown situation comes up again, where he fumbles at the goal line, stretching out, and gets run back the distance by Sam Hubbard. And unfortunately, there's no way that he avoids that being the play that Ravens fans remember him for. He could almost come back, relieve in a Super Bowl, and it would be difficult to forget that play.
I totally agree. I think it's one that we're really going to want back. Personally, as a Ravens fan, I've had the privilege to watch so many playoff games over the years. I tend to not get bent out of shape about the games I feel that the Ravens did not deserve to win. And I really, really felt like maybe if they didn't quite deserve to win that Bengals game, that it was very close, that I was still really bummed out afterward. It was just two plays, it felt like. And with the way that the defense was coming on so strong in the latter part of the second half, it unfortunately, I feel like most of us can pretty confidently say that, if that play went at all differently. And I remember listening on your show to you talk about the swing of win probability from that one play. It was just astronomical. So I think it is one that we're going to remember for a really long time, unfortunately.
Yeah, what I remember, and I may have this wrong, but 69% before the play and 14% after the play in terms of their win probability. So you can't do, I mean, it's really hard to find a single play, particularly that's a little bit earlier in the game like that. That's not the last play of the game, where it could be, in theory, it could be 100-0 after the play, meaning you could be Monday Night Football in 2001, where Steve McNair tried to run the ball in on fourth and one. That could be 100 or 0, after that play, or very close to it, because they still have to kick an extra point to win. But in the before the play, it might have been 50-50. So it's still only a 50% move in the thing. This to be a 55% move, and earlier in the fourth quarter like this, you got to have one of these swing plays. So this is right up there with Anthony Mitchell on the positive side, returning the blocked field goal against the Titans. I mean, it's a back-breaking difference in the game, and it's something we'll remember. And let's try to move on from it, because there's Tyler Huntley, it looks like, will be a member of the 2023 Ravens. I kind of was not expecting that to be the case, and it's not a sure thing still, because he's on an RFA tender, $2.67 million. It's not guaranteed. So if somebody outplays him in camp, it is still possible he would not be on the team. It's also possible that they might say, we can't take this risk again with Jackson, and we need another quarterback. And I think the Ravens are now in a position with Monken that it could be a different style of quarterback than what they've typically had as their backups in the Lamar era.
I totally agree. I personally was a little surprised to see them sign Josh Johnson. I kind of thought it would be someone different. I mean, I think in Josh Johnson, it's abundantly clear what you're getting at this point, for better and worse. I also wonder, I don't know too much about the new rule for the game day quarterback elevation and how that's going to impact things for the Ravens. I would think, I mean, Josh Johnson is going to pass through, like if he needs to pass through waivers, he would, but I don't know that Huntley would.
Yeah, Huntley is now an RFA. Yeah, I guess he's still subject to the waiver process at this point. So, I'm not sure. But help me with the rule here, because I know it changed. I know there's a third quarterback that you can have that's not on your 48 that is then available to play in the game. But I think he still has to be on your roster. He has to be on your 53, or you have to elevate him from the practice squad.
I was going to say, I don't actually, I'm not sure. I thought that it could be a practice squad elevation, though, and effectively making the game day roster a 54-man roster if teams chose to dress that emergency quarterback on game days.
That's in news to me, and we'll have to look at that. We'll have to take a look and see if we can find that citation in the rules. Um, you know, the situation the Ravens are in with having a great quarterback and now on a second contract does not lend itself well to having a good backup quarterback. It's very difficult to spend $8 million a year on a really good backup quarterback when you're spending $52 million a year on your starting quarterback.
Exactly. And I think throughout the whole Lamar negotiation process, excuse me, I kind of wondered if that was leaking its way into the calculus at all. Because I mean, as you said earlier on this podcast, um, for all of the good things Lamar is, he hasn't finished any of the last 3 seasons for the Ravens. The last time he finished a season for the Ravens was the home playoff loss to the Titans, which feels like an eternity ago. And he is the kind of guy who, I mean, when he's in and playing well, there's probably nobody better. But that unfortunately just isn't all the time anymore. I mean, he is getting hurt and he is missing time. And having a good, solid backup quarterback in today's game is very valuable. I personally think that Huntley is really, really close to being that game manager backup quarterback. I think it's those mental errors. They're fairly rare. It's one or two a game. I remember he had a horrible interception against Cleveland. He had another bad one against the Bengals, and then the fumble against the Bengals. If we take out those seemingly mental mistakes, he's really close to being that level. And maybe with a fresh perspective from Monken, he can take that next step.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see if Monken can bring something to that. Uh, the rookie deal for Lamar, they went cheap the whole time, pretty much on offense. They had a high cost defense, but the 2019 team, I've made the point many times, is one of the most efficient in NFL history, and it's even more efficient when you consider it per cap dollar spent. So it's really outrageously good football team. If you look at the guys they had as the backup quarterbacks, though, aside from Flacco in 18 to finish the season, of course, Flacco was the starter that year. From 19 on, they've all had guys who were stylistic matches. RG3, Tyler Huntley, even Anthony Brown, who's not the same runner, but has a little bit of ability to move and a little bit of mobility to get around the pocket. And Josh Johnson, of course, who's now on his second tour with the Ravens with this time around is somewhat similar. I think with Monken, it may give the Ravens more of a chance to go out and get a traditional guy. So if Kirk Cousins was their backup, I think Monken would be able to adapt to that, with 1 week's notice.
I totally agree. Yeah, it's hard to tell who I remember it feels so long ago now, but at the beginning of last regular season, I think literally before any games had been played, I was kind of hoping that Daniel Jones, if things went a certain way for the Giants last year, that he maybe could have come in and been Lamar's backup. The polar opposite pretty much happened, but no, I totally agree with what you're saying. I think that I'm a little bit surprised that Huntley's still here as well. I do wonder how much that is because of Todd Monken coming in, because with Roman, we had pretty much seen, we all knew Huntley pretty well, by the end of that Bengals game, for all of his pros and cons. But I think with the fresh perspective, that's probably the main hope behind keeping him on the team as of now.
All right, well, let's move on. And what would be a good season for you, and what would be a great one? But why don't you start with a good season, then I'll give you my good season definition.
Yeah, so I think it's a little tricky with, as we said, a backup quarterback to a premier starting quarterback. I would say a good season for Huntley would and again, I'm trying to separate this from Lamar staying healthy as much as I can. I think it's probably him playing the same amount that he did last year, which I think was about 5 or 6 games. And I think just, a slight improvement. You're never going to eliminate the mental mistakes, but I mean, his final line in 5 games was 2 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. I would say, if he were to play the same amount, flipping that number around and then some, so maybe 4 touchdowns, 1 interception, and running the ball a little bit more, really kind of opening the field a little bit more. That's probably where I would post it. But again, with a backup quarterback, it's kind of tricky because we probably, we hope he doesn't play at all except in garbage time.
Yeah, well, there you go. That's really how I feel about it. A good season for me, I'd define it differently. I'd say he plays well enough in camp that there's no question about the Ravens signing another QB. That they say, okay, no, we're going to stick with Huntley. Look at what he did in the preseason. He's running the ball. He's making good decisions. And what we've seen in practice and the preseason games is enough for us to be comfortable going with him. And then ideally, obviously, wouldn't play at all. But there's not a lot of sense talking about what he would to my way of thinking anyway. I'm not trying to put down what you just did, but there's not a lot of sense like trying to discuss like where exactly he would finish in some limited playing time, because obviously he has to be better than he was last year during the regular season, and he has to be better than he was the season before during the regular season, even though the Ravens rallied around him to a certain degree and still able to run the football effectively. But the only thing I would say is a good reason is that the Ravens feel happy about the money they gave him on an RFA tender enough that there's no discussion of replacing him. And I'd extend that to during the season as well, not just in the initial roster decision. How about a great season? What's your call on that?
Certainly. So I think for a great season, I think building on what you said, where he makes the team, period. There's no debate about it. It's a very uneventful announcement. Tyler Huntley is on the 53-man roster to start the season. I think for a great season, I mean, that probably involves him playing, I would say. And I would say it's really just the fact that it'll appear he's taken a next step with a new offensive coordinator, and he's really benefiting from that. We do forget that last year he played with a very depleted offensive playmaker room as well. So hopefully that group can stay relatively healthy this year, and he's really able to kind of build on that. He can make that second read now. Because I mean, this year it seems like he's going to have to with the weapons, outside for the Ravens. Mark Andrews, of course, on the inside. That would be really huge for me if he was able to do that, and I think that the Ravens offense would totally benefit.
Yeah, I like yours better than what I have written, because if you're just making progress towards making multiple reads per play would be a huge thing. I said does not see the field except in mop-up duty, but he plays well enough in practice and in the preseason that he already has pretty much earned his 2024 role. So the first one, the good is just he earns his 2023 role without question, and the great is he earns his 2024 role. And it wouldn't shock me if he signs another kind of a 1-year, $3 million deal, or I guess it would be really great if he signed a 2-year, $8 million deal. That would indicate a lot of confidence in him, where they make a move like that.
Absolutely. And so could he do the RFA tender again next year? Do you know?
No. Okay. No, he's a free agent, so the Ravens will have to sign him, and they might sign him for 1 or 2 years, and there may or may not be interest in him around the league. There's a lot of spots to fill, and the third quarterback rule, as you mentioned, may actually play a part in other teams discussing it, and also the fact that there are more mobile quarterbacks in the league may make him a larger prize to other teams.
Absolutely, yeah, and wide variety of rankings on him. I saw a segment where Chris Sims ranked him as the 29th best quarterback in the league, which I was pretty surprised by.
Uh-huh. I'd have to go through to find that there weren't 30 or 35 guys that I thought were better. Agreed. Well, let's move on and talk about Brandon Stephens. Another guy who had a little bit of a frustrating season, did seem to be playing his best football at the end of the year, as you mentioned earlier. But why don't you take us through in terms of 22, start us off in terms of what you saw, and then I'll chip in.
Yeah, so I think it's kind of been a whirlwind with Brandon Stevens. Going back to when he was drafted in the second to last pick of the third round in 2021. Um, I remember feeling fairly strongly that that was a reach. Once I read more into him, I really liked his potential, as you know, potentially his ability to play outside corner along with safety. But yeah, last season his defensive snaps from 2021, he was on the field for 21% fewer snaps, going from 68 to 47%, while his special team snaps increased to 56%. I think it's great that he can play special teams, but I don't know that that was really the hope going into the season, that his defensive snaps would decrease that much while his special team snaps increased. Nearly three-quarters of his snaps were as an outside corner, which, you know, at first glance is encouraging. But then I think when we dig in a little bit deeper to how some of those games went, particularly the Jacksonville game, even more particularly the last drive of that game, it's tough to forget that when looking at his 2022 season to me. But like we said, he did finish it on a strong note against Atlanta and Pittsburgh.
Yeah, positive thing. So you mentioned the outside cornerback snaps. That is where he played most of his time. He played a lot of the rest of his snaps in the slot and very little at safety. So they tried to move him to corner, and they really tried to move him at outside corner. I think it's a good thing they did that in 22. And you hear good things about DaCosta talking about the end of the season, that he was playing his best at the end of the season. I certainly agree with that. But John Harbaugh has since said we're planning to move him back to safety. I'm looking at the Ravens cornerback room and saying they have a lot of bodies, but I don't know who they think is really, going to provide the quality at corner. I don't know who would be the backup slot corner. I guess Pepe, when if he's needed, but it's really a problem. I mean, the outside corner position right now is so weak that it just makes all kinds of sense for me that they would keep Stevens there. And find another safety if they have to. Honestly, that position is a lot easier to fill, particularly with what the Ravens ask of it. I think there's less, but the top three guys are all quite good with Stone, Williams, and Hamilton. Now Hamilton, I think will stay at slot corner, which obviously does impact Stevens.
Right, right. I think right now there are a lot of dominoes that need to fall, as far as just kind of really clearing up his role for this coming year. We need to see how he performs in camp. We need to see ultimately if Marcus Peters is coming back as a UFA. Rock Ya-Sin got signed, and then really Hamilton. I understand that the goal is for him to stay at slot corner. But then, like you said, it kind of just raises the question of, okay, well, if he's needed elsewhere, is Brandon Stevens going to go be the slot corner again, presumably leaving that safety spot? And then is Geno Stone going to fill in for Stevens at safety, or sort of just what is going to happen there? Like there are just so many different variables there.
I agree, but to me, Geno Stone is so far ahead of Stevens as a safety. I don't think you would make that change. Geno Stone filled in a free safety for Marcus Williams, and the drop off was unbelievably not that much. So, I mean, obviously everyone would prefer to have Marcus Williams at free safety over Geno Stone, but he's a good split field safety. You want to play cover two, he can do it for you. You want him on the back end of cover one. He plays that nice loose bracket that is going for the overthrow. He's a turnover guy in particular. I just like him a lot better than Brandon Stevens at safety. And Stevens is the better, more physical athlete in total. There's no doubt about that. He's certainly faster. But I think a lot of that speed and size could be well employed on the outside. I think in a way it's wasted at safety. And one of the things you need to have at safety is a really good tackler. And that just is not Brandon Stevens. So, I mean, if you're going to put him into a bigger tackling role that also de-emphasizes his speed, you're giving yourself a 1-2 punch to the gut. You don't need to do.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Do you think Stevens could overtake Rock Ya-Sin for the outside corner spot?
I don't really believe so. I mean, honestly, the place I'd like to see him is about the number 4 corner. So I'd like to sign Peters, have Rock Ya-Sin be the 3, have him be the 4, and 4 on the outside. And then I think you got a really strong and deep group. And we know injuries happen every year at that position. Everybody misses time. It wouldn't even hurt to do some rotational play and get them all on the field early in the season, so everybody's kind of prepared to get their chance when it inevitably comes up. But you got some older corners on this team now, with a combination of Humphrey's not really old yet, but he's been playing in the league a few years. He's just turning 27, I believe, next month, which is nice. But Rock Ya-Sin has been in the league a few years, and you have Peters, if they bring him back, certainly would be a guy you'd be concerned about from an injury perspective, and still love his skills, but you'd be concerned about from an injury perspective. So I think you got to prepare for yourself for cornerback depth that is real. Where I'm probably even more concerned right now about the Ravens' depth at slot corner as opposed to on the outside. And I'm tremendously concerned on the outside. I don't know how the Ravens are going to sift through this group of guys when you go with, Seymour and Worley and Trayvon Mullins and all the guys who are beyond the starting guys. How are they going to even figure out who's good enough to make a decision by the time cut time comes?
No, absolutely. I mean, depending on how many people they keep, it's a crowded room already for sure. With Pepe and Jalen Armour-Davis, as well. There are definitely going to be some decisions to make, and it's kind of hard at this point to see how the Ravens wouldn't have to give up on one of these guys a little bit earlier than they maybe would have liked to.
Yeah. So they've had some of that recently. The guy that traded the Patriots a couple of years ago was a 5th-round draft pick, I think, and they traded him, and I think they essentially got their draft pick back a year deferred. It does happen. You just get overcrowded at a position, but anyway, it is what it is. I kind of left JAD out of there. You go back to that New England game this year. That was one of the real low points for Brandon Stephens. But think about it. JAD started the game. He's benched after 9 snaps. Then they put Stephens in, and he was benched in the 3rd quarter. I cannot ever recall seeing a game where 2 players got benched for non-injury reasons at the same position in one game. I cannot ever recall it happening. And left tackle, quarterback, defensive line, whatever it might be. But, I guess a cornerback is kind of a place where it might be more likely to happen than just about anywhere else. But it's still really scary to see that happen. Maybe running back would be another good possibility if you get a couple fumblers going in the same game.
Yeah, I was going to say maybe cornerback or like tackle. I feel like we've been close to that a couple times. But yeah, no, I totally agree that was alarming, especially against Mac Jones. I believe that was when
Yep.
that was definitely the high point of his season, looking back on it. So
Until the 4th quarter. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. But yeah, no, I think I'm really interested. Harbaugh's comments about Brandon Stephens recently, where he described him as something of a jack of all trades, kind of just makes me think that he's a free agent after the 2024 season. Is the goal for him to really just kind of get experience playing almost everywhere and be like the Patrick McCary of the defensive backfield? Because it seems like it's kind of tough for him to get entrenched anywhere.
I so hope that is not the goal. All right. I mean, you've got Kyle Hamilton on the field, and he, I think, has demonstrated the ability to play 2 positions. And I don't think there's going to be a problem if you need to move him back to safety. We could get a bad surprise, but honestly, it won't be a long-lasting bad surprise if we get it and we find out he's really better close to the line of scrimmage, doing all the things that he does down there because he's been so good as a slot corner. But basically, I look at this as like a Kemalai Correa situation almost with Stephens, as a guy who they couldn't find a position for him, and every time they moved him, it kind of hurt him. It's I can't imagine Brandon is really happy with this. I bet some part of him is saying, look, I want to be versatile. I want to be valuable. I can play anywhere. Put me in, coach. But on the other hand, put me in and give me one damn spot. I've got a lot to learn here, a lot to process. He may not think about it that way because he's been this guy at SMU too. They moved him on a down by down basis around the field between safety and corner. And it just, he's gotten used to it, obviously. And, this is a guy who started his college career as a running back.
Right. Yeah, running back at UCLA. So, I mean, he's only been in the defensive backfield probably since, like 2019. So, yeah, that's pretty crazy. And I think, yeah, I'm really interested to see, and I think, like you just said, it really depends on where they are most comfortable playing Hamilton. Is it being that playmaker up close on the line of scrimmage, or maybe they move him back to safety if they think he's more valuable to the team there, playing next to Marcus Williams, or really not even next to Marcus Williams because he would be in the box most likely.
I think you can look at their personnel moves and say they acquired Rock Ya-Sin. They're talking about acquiring Marcus Peters, so they have a little bit extra corner depth. I haven't heard one peep of going out and getting a slot corner, and the team is desperate for a slot corner if Hamilton is moved. And I don't think they want the answer to be Humphrey moving back to the slot. I don't think it's a good answer for Humphrey at this point in his career at all, really, to move him to the inside. They still are going to follow with Humphrey, the number one receiver. But if he's your dedicated slot receiver, then you lose that option to follow, right, to have him go to the outside. So I don't see that as a good move. I also think his physicality and what he does to react to the football in the hands of the opponent, either at the catch point or even with some of the forced fumbles he's had in the past, plays much better on the outside. It's not a slot characteristic. He has good second man to the ball characteristics, good ability as a pass rusher, which has really shown up that does play well in the slot. But I think he gives you more on the outside in aggregate. And he's got to be a guy you treat with kid gloves as well. If you keep him on the outside, his chance to get hurt is probably less than it is in the slot.
That's a great point. And that was about Humphrey, right?
Yeah, about Humphrey, yeah.
Yeah. I totally agree. Yeah, I think that's where he's the most effective for sure. He's the guy who, if he allows a catch, it's not the end of the world because what's coming next, it's, at least in the past, there's a decent chance that it's a forced fumble. So, yeah, that's definitely huge. I think just kind of going back to how Stevens progressed last year, obviously that Jaguars game was really really a low light. But then just, playing very well in the Atlanta game and then doing very well against George Pickens, most notably on a 3rd and 2 play in the corner of the end zone where he had the pass break up to force a field goal from the 2-yard line. I mean, that was huge.
Yep.
And then I think really just going against Cincinnati's glut of receivers for either of those final 2 games, honestly, would have been really valuable to the Ravens to see where Stevens truly was. Jacksonville game at that point is in the rearview mirror, and he has 2 good ones under his belt. Then when it starts to really, really matter against Cincinnati, it would have been great to see that. I think that was when they brought back Worley for something like the 15th time last year.
Yeah.
So it would have been really, really interesting to see how Stevens played in those games.
Yeah, I think the Ravens were, hurt by him not being available, obviously. One thing I'll say about Stevens' season that I don't think we hit on already is that he has a lot of penalties. 8 penalties on 452 snaps is a lot, but he only had 1 penalty in the second half of the season. So a lot of that was coming early against New England. First, really 3 weeks of the season, I think he had about 2 penalties a week. So it was in the stretch drive. He actually had gotten over some of that grabbiness. That brings me to a point is that I don't know whether they coached that out of him, but I have felt like this year more than any other, because the Ravens usually have stars at corner, they could really use a top flight cornerback coach who can, first of all, identify talent very quickly, clearly communicate what's going wrong with certain players, try and get them to fix it, obviously. But position coaches are gold. And right now, that's a place where the Ravens don't know what depth they really have. And so they're going to have to figure that out. A lot of eyes will be working at that. and that includes DeCosta and Harbaugh and other coaches, frankly, as they discuss each of these cornerbacks as they go around. But the cornerback coaches' impact on this, both as a teacher and as a selector, is so critical. It's an area where if they had $5 million or whatever the amount is, I don't know what the amount is that they spent on Chuck Smith, but if they had $1 million or $2 million to pay to one particular position coach, I'd look for them to bring in a great corners coach.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think just with their personnel at that position right now, I would totally agree. Like if they could bring in a good corners coach to get, one or two of these guys even to just, really step up, that would really, really significantly change the outlook of the team for the next couple of years.
Mm-hmm. All right. Outstanding. So let's talk about a good season and a great season for Brandon Stephens. What's a good season to you?
So I think it's probably a little bit lower, maybe even a lot lower than most of us were hoping it would be at this time if you had asked us at the end of the 2021 regular season. I was pretty happy with the way that he played as a rookie. And then last year, I think it just caused a lot of confusion. I think before the Atlanta game, for instance, a lot of us were probably pretty down on him, and then it starts to come back, and then for non-football reasons, he's out before he can really kind of make that final impression on us. So I would probably say, and again, it's so hard because of the dominoes with personnel and whatnot. I would probably say a 60th percentile year is he plays a lot of outside corner, hope behind Peters maybe, or even behind Rock Ya-Sin. And it's similar to last year, but he kind of shows that he's maybe a little bit better than a replacement level outside cornerback, leaving us to be at least a little bit excited about his season going into the final year of his rookie deal, which would be the next year.
Okay, I think that's good, and you've managed your expectations down in terms of that 60th percentile, which I think is always good in this. I'd say a good season. He retains his core special teams role. He plays on all four of the kick and return units, and that's very important. He needs to have that value to the team to make sure he's active on a weekly basis. Finds a permanent position, and honestly, if it's slot corner, I don't think he's the right guy for the slot. I don't think he has the skill set for it. I think his physicality works much better on the outside. But I think whether it's outside corner or safety, I want him to have one position. I want him to get some opportunity to play there, hopefully due to rotation. But obviously injuries are so inevitable at the position. I'm fine with that if it happens, and makes a contribution that is at least average cornerback play in the league. Not a guy you have to worry about every time he's out there. But his play is at least at the average level, and he's a guy who's your third or fourth corner. Probably your fourth would be ideal, and he's in there on a backup basis.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a ton of sense. I forgot to mention special teams in my kind of assessment, but I totally agree. I think him being out there on all four special teams units again is crucial.
Or how about a great season?
So I think in a great season, I can probably again see that a little bit clearer at outside corner. I think that would be where I'm the most excited about him, at the end of next season. And I think, he starts to force some turnovers, frankly. He doesn't have his first career interception yet. I don't think he has a forced fumble either. So, just starting to do a little bit of that. I know it may not necessarily be his bread and butter. That game against Pickens, he was really good, and he didn't do either of those things. He did have, at least one pass breakup. So I think it's him, entrenching himself probably as the number 2 outside corner, and starting to force some turnovers. I know that may right now, just thinking about last season, it may seem unlikely, but 80th percentile is pretty good.
A good point about the ball skills in general are not terrific. He did have 7 passes defensed in the snaps he played, but he played a lot of snaps. Marlon Humphrey, by the way, only had 7 passes defensed last year, but your typical league leader might be in the 22 range something like that. And you'd hope your quarterbacks, your corners, both of them are at least in the teens. That of course includes your interceptions and your passes defensed as the pros account for stats. At college level, it's done differently where those two are separated. I'll give you my great season is that the switch is turned on and he becomes an effective player at either of those positions. And I'm not going to try and overdefine it because the Ravens are going to make their choice in terms of where he plays. But whether it's safety or outside corner, by improving on his end of year play. And what we saw there at the end of the year, I think was good enough that there is hope he could be on the outside corner, which is one of the reasons I'm kind of frustrated by the talk about moving to safety. First of all, I don't like it from where the Ravens depth perspective is, but I also don't like it from where I think Brandon Stephens might be more comfortable watching him play for the 2 seasons he's been here now. It just seems like he brings more to that outside corner position than he does to safety. But in any case, I think the Ravens could much more use him as depth at outside corner than they can at depth at safety. But we'll see how they play it out. And to me, that would be a great season. Is he plays somewhere effectively. One thing I can say for Brandon Stephens is I'd be fairly certain that he gets on the field at some point at some position this year, just because of the way things happen in the secondary and the likelihood of injury.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think that we're not really going to know, like obviously the plan as of this very moment, it is for safety, but we'll see. I'm really excited to see how he plays in camp and in the preseason, and really just what the team's plan is for him. I think he had to have figured in, along with some unhappiness from the player perspective, on Chuck Clark getting traded to the Jets. I think, the team was probably pretty confident that either Stephens or Stone could step into that role. So I'm really excited to see what happens with him this year. It definitely feels like a really, really pivotal third year for him, though.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Dan, always great talking football with you. You're very prepared for the show. Really appreciate it. You're able to go into great detail about this, and this will post soon. Hopefully, we're recording this on the 13th. We'll hope it'll be up by no later than about the 20th at the latest. Tell folks where they can find you and talk football online.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you as always for having me, Ken. It's always so much fun. I am on Twitter at DRE8820.
All right. Outstanding. You should be doing some writing or podcasting, Dan, and maybe we'll talk about that after we get off air here. But other folks out there, if you'd like to be on a film study short, hit me up. DMs are always open on Twitter. We're kind of closing down the That One Play series, but if you want to talk about anything else, feel free. If you really have a That One Play you want to do, I'll still do it with you. Just send me a DM on Twitter. As I said, I'll get right back to you very quickly. Dan, thanks again for coming on.
Thank you so much, Ken.
And we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.